The journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today. So, Rob, welcome to the journey. And I know a few months ago you had been on the journey, and that was your first time here. And so, but you're a pretty busy guy right now, and involved with a lot of different things. And wanted to just kind of bring the listeners up to where you're at on your own personal and professional, and some of the things that you're involved in your own journey. So, Rob Young, and involved with Midwest Packaging. Owner and operator of that and CEO of that, but a handful of other things here in the community. So I know one of the things that you're really involved with is the Family Peace Center, and so tell us a little bit about that and what's what it is essentially, what's gone on to get it into the making, and then what are you guys hoping to do?
Well, first off, thanks for having me on again. I know that I don't know what the record is for appearances on the journey, but it'd be great to break that record.
Yeah, there you go. I think right now Dalton might be in the lead, but
okay, well,
but this will number 2, and we'll have a couple more for you. So
there you go. So yeah, happy to be back on. Appreciate it.
Okay.
So yeah, the Family Peace Center was kind of a collaborative community effort that was led by the mayor's office.
Okay.
It was something that as this administration, Mayor Tom McNamara got involved and started digging into what the biggest impact could be on our violent crime statistics, for instance. So 1/3 of all violent crimes, 1/3 of all police calls, 911 calls are domestic violence related. 1/3 of all violent crime in our community is domestic violence related in one way or the other. And this isn't a west side or east side problem. This is something that affects every single precinct, every single ward, every single district throughout our city. So that was something that the mayor correctly identified as a way that we need to kind of get help to survivors and kind of get a centralized place where survivors can be heard and something can be done for justice, of course.
I know, and I think I mentioned this before, but I've been running for almost, I think, 11 years now, the homicide support group for the state's attorney's office, and a lot of the homicides in the Rockford area that I'm familiar with are, for ones that come to the group, have to do with some level of domestic violence, or the victims were involved with some level of they were not only a victim of homicide, but they were a victim of domestic violence maybe prior to that last act that took their life. And so it's definitely been a problem. It has a huge impact and a ripple effect, I know, on those families.
Oh, absolutely. And I think nationally, the overwhelming odds that if a homicide does occur, unfortunately, the victim will intimately know the perpetrator,
right.
And that's just facts nationally. And then locally here, as you mentioned, there are cases where domestic violence is often the precursor to an eventual homicide.
Right.
And so, if you're looking at preventable crime and the ability to actually save lives, having a way to stop that in a first response of sorts, where a survivor can go and be able to get a restraining order, be able to get child care or housing taken care of, and if they choose, seek justice for it as well. All those things can be housed centrally here. Where currently the system is, they have to go, I think it's 15 or 20 different places and retell their story over and over and over again. I mean, the worst day of their life, hands down.
Yeah.
The completely traumatic event that shouldn't happen to anyone, frankly. And they have to retell that story to complete strangers who may not even believe them.
Right.
They may have to make a case for their own story while possibly handling children, while having possibly life-threatening injuries all during this process. It just, as a community, it's unacceptable.
Yeah.
And I got involved with the Family Peace Center kind of in its infancy because of a seminar that I went to as a young professional. And the city put together a video with a lot of survivor stories and statistics, and the room went completely quiet. I mean, it was deafening, the silence about the gravity of the situation and the problem that we were facing as a community. And so when I was invited by the mayor to be on to establish the 100 Men Who Give a Damn initiative, I was completely all in.
Sure, gotcha. I know, just having been involved as a social worker and a counselor for as long as I have, and then through other initiatives, just when you were talking about that particular person, when they are finally able to make a stand and attempt to start liberating themselves from the cycle, I think that's a thing that a lot of people don't understand. It's been going on for a while. This was very seldom, if ever, is it an isolated incident, and it's this building process that comes in, and it's such a psychological strain on the victim, and there's almost always more than one victim, because if there are children, then there's more individuals that are being affected, even if they're not physically touched themselves. The emotional element of their, most of the time it's women, but it can be men, can be victims too, but most of the time it's women watching their mom having been victimized from physical abuse, verbal abuse, the emotional abuse, and the violence is that carries on to those children. Those children, are somehow attempting to go to school the next day. Yeah. And then, and so distracted because of a variety of different things, but what's going on at home and and everything that goes along with that. But it's usually there, and I don't. People who've not had any experience with it, and thank goodness that they haven't, may not understand that this has been a long build-up to this process, that it wasn't just, you hit me or grabbed me or choked me, and then they, call the police. No, it's been, the term, I'm going to use the term grooming. It's not necessarily the right term to use, but there is an element of building that up. So.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a cycle of violence is what it is. And we've found in our statistics and our longitudinal studies that if a child is subjected to domestic violence in their home at an early age, there's an overwhelming likelihood that they're going to be a perpetrator or victim later on in their lives. Actually, half of all violent crime committed in our community is done by someone who is exposed to domestic violence in their childhood.
So even though what you're saying, the statistics are saying, even if they themselves don't become a perpetrator in domestic violence, they may be involved with some level of violent crime.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because that is just, it's obviously a terrible environment for a child. I mean, psychologically, it's devastating to be able to see that level of violence intimately, that close as when you're in your most innocent years. And then also they could go on to be victims as well, because that has become normalized in a way. They're seeking out unhealthy relationships, and obviously in and out of jail or halfway houses or whatever the case may be. And we really need to be able to end the cycle of violence. And the way you do that is you're able to get peace, and you're able to get some form of care given to these survivors. Another thing I wanted to point out is that it's the most famous case recently was the Heritage Credit Union standoff. That was a huge, made national news. He had a history of violence, history of domestic violence, and again, that was not taken. The proper channels were not taken to make sure that he couldn't harm others. Because you're right, for every victim, there likely was a string of victims before, and there will be a string of victims after. And then every story that comes forward, unfortunately, we know there are many who never come forward.
Correct. Yeah.
And we don't. You don't know exactly what those statistics are, but it's been proven that communities that have family peace centers oftentimes see a lot more cases that are resolved, and a lot more women and people that are survivors are willing to tell their story.
Yeah. So what is, and I know it's going to be able to do a lot of things, so it's going to be hard to kind of capture that in a paragraph or whatever, but what's the intent of what the Family Peace Center is going to do for the community, but more even more specifically for individuals who've been victimized through domestic violence? What's the Family Peace Center intending to do?
So the Family Peace Center ultimately will be a physical place that survivors can go that will have all the resources they need to be able to handle what they're going through at that time. There'll be a psychological aspect. There'll be obviously medical care. There'll be a form of the state's attorney will have justices there. They'll have attorneys. Judges will be there to be able to grant restraining orders if need be. There'll be housing and there'll be child care services there. I think there'll be like 30 or 40 different partners that are housed under one roof. Okay. And so all of that process, all of that difficult logistical nightmare, psychological mountain that these survivors have to climb, again on the worst day of their life, will all be done under one roof, where they can go and hopefully be able to find some sort of peace and be able to rebuild a lot of what they lost.
So, and again, I know that men can be victims as well, but majority are women, and so a woman could go there. Her and her children could both go there, and then they could stay there. What's the parameters of time?
So it's going to depend on. So the latest update on the actual physical location is that the Family Peace Center Phase 1 is breaking into a Phase 1 and a Phase 2. So Phase 1 will be at the current Regional 1 Planning Center. We're going to be in there by July 1st at the very latest. That's right across the street from the Coronado there on Main Street. So the R1 Planning Center, they're currently looking at obviously relocating, and then at that time we'll be able to move in, and so that'll be a temporary location. And then Phase 2 will actually be a larger building that'll be the permanent home of the Family Peace Center.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, and details are still being worked out there, but we're making a lot of progress on Phase 2.
Okay. So I know a friend of mine, Gary Halbeck, who runs Remedies, and that used to be Wave and Phase, and now they're all under one name of Remedies, and they have a beautiful building off of State Street. Now, it sounds like the Family Peace Center is similar to Remedies, but there's some things that are different, because there's going to be some of the things that the Family Peace Center is offering. Because I know that at Remedies, from what I understand of it, they offer the shelter. They offer the moms and the families can be there. It's only for women and their children. They can be there. Obviously, they're able to get therapy and get treatment for their healing and recovery from the psychological and the emotional piece. But that's where Family Peace Center is coming in and doing similar to that, but then also different because of helping out from a legal standpoint as well.
Yeah, Remedies is a partner in the Family Peace Center. I want to obviously make sure that that's known. But yeah, what will kind of be more encompassing than what Remedies is currently offering is that there's going to be that legal side of things. There's going to be that justice side of things that's going to be housed there. So instead of Remedies would be one stop of many. If you want a restraining order, you want any kind of testifying has to be done. All those things can be done in one location instead of having a stop to make sure that child care is taken care of. It's a major problem. Child care, and obviously any kind of medical needs that you might need right after an event like that might happen. But there are many steps that need to happen along the process, and unfortunately take quite a bit of time during the justice process that can be expedited through a Family Peace Center.
So I know with some of the victims that I've worked with through different time periods of counseling and different sites of counseling, when a person hits some level of a bottom, and it may very well have the last incident may have to do with some type of violence that may have happened, and that is the precursor and the catalyst for them to leave. Other times it may be that there was some opportunity to leave, that the violence had been ongoing, and then the opportunity comes where they can leave, or they themselves believe that they have a resource they can go to and feel like they can be strong enough to step into this unknown. And I know with a lot of the victims that I work with, it's that fear. and the shame that comes with it, because, as I've mentioned before, it's usually not an isolated incident, and if it is, we haven't probably heard about it yet, because at that point they're keeping it under wraps, and so this idea that they get caught up in the cycle, or the domestic violence cycle, and at least the terminology that I was taught with was the battered wife, even if they're not married, syndrome. And there's a psychological piece, because I know many times when people will leave, and then because of the shame, and then later they have guilt for the perpetrator, that they left them.
Stockholm syndrome, essentially.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's psychological manipulation. It's psychological domination.
Yeah.
And part of that is that no one will believe you. I'm your best hope. I'm going to take care of you after this. These elements can be broken down with a sense of trust and a sense of peace, that if I go someplace, I know that I'll be safe, and I'll be safe. And unless you have a firm sense of like, I'm willing to take that leap because I know that I have partners that are going to help me, it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult. And I think that unless you have that place that, and by the way, when this was announced, survivors actually started coming into the mayor's office just because they've heard about it on the news. They've heard that this initiative was starting. And by no means is the mayor's office equipped to handle, and obviously in the mayor's office, as President State is not equipped to handle these survivors, but that just goes to show you that survivors are hearing about it. They're taking notice, and there's a definite need in the community for some place to go.
Right. So phase one for the Family Peace Center is July. That's the projected date, is July, and then obviously there'll be more to come. So that's one of the many projects that you're involved with. And so I know you just recently in the fall came on as a board member for Shatter Our Silence and the suicide prevention program that we've been doing for 4 years now. What other things are you involved with besides those two organizations?
So I just joined the Rockford Chamber of Commerce for the board of directors there. I'm obviously a business leader in the community, owning a small business here, and I think that economic development is a crucial part of where we need to go in terms of how we can bring money and prosperity into our community. I'm also on the strategy team for Next Rockford, which is a group of young professionals that advocate for change, positive change in our community, because it is kind of unusual as we look around at different boards and things like that, for someone my age, I'm 32 years old, to be involved in, and that shouldn't be the case. Young people should know that they have pathways to do things here in our community, that it's not just to graduate from high school and then get out. Unfortunately, Rockford and Illinois just generally has a problem retaining young talent, and there's creating pathways and kind of serving as a model for younger people in our community, I think, is a really important thing. I'm also on the board for the Rockford Promise, which is a model that I'm really passionate about and doing a lot of work with recently, that's been sending underprivileged kids, underserved kids to university, either Rock Valley or Rockford University here in our community through the RPS 205 program. Okay.
So going back, I have a couple questions about Next Rockford. So Next Rockford is really focusing on, I guess it wouldn't just be business leaders, right? It would be young leaders. And what is what's the demographic of young leader? Is that based upon age? Is that based upon what is that based on?
So we do have a cutoff age of being born after 1965, even though we do fudge on that every once in a while.
Okay.
So we don't totally discriminate against the older generation, but it is kind of the whole premise is around younger people. Like obviously, working professionals in our community, age 21 to 50 or whatever it is.
Sure.
So we have a younger board. A lot of people that kind of look and think like me, and there is a generational gap in terms of how the different generations approach problems and communicate, and how that kind of changes when you're dealing with the baby boomers, Gen X, the millennials. I mean, it's all something that is very relevant to our workplace and our community and how business is done. But what Next Rockford does is we have monthly meetings where we have speakers come in and give us updates on the community. We don't plan out our whole year. It's not like we have 12 speakers lined up, in January. We do that on purpose because we like to, as something's coming up in the community, we like to be flexible and responsive to what's going on. But we always meet with the mayor, we always meet with the county board chairman. We have an update from them. Usually the Rockford Chamber of Commerce comes in, gives an update, and the REDC, and then the rest of the meetings are kind of as things happen.
Gotcha. Okay. I know we talked about this the last time you were on the show, but was to remind some of our listeners, and then for new listeners that are coming on, you were in your late 20s, right, when you made the decision, mid to late 20s, when you made the decision that you were going to stay in Rockford or come back to Rockford and then stay and create some roots in Rockford. But you could have gone probably anywhere, right? There's a lot of opportunities for you to go. Why did you decide? What was your personal reasons for deciding to stay in Rockford and Winnebago County?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that you can, like as you said, I mean, I could have gone to Chicago. It seems like young people my age love leaving and going to a bigger city for the lifestyle or whatever, but the opportunities here are unique, and the challenges that Rockford faces, it's exciting in the fact that you can make a difference here, or maybe you couldn't elsewhere. In Chicago, you're one of millions. You're just another fish in the sea, so to speak. Where Rockford, you can really dig in and be able to see your impact go a lot further. And honestly, the momentum and all the positive things that are going on here are really exciting to be a part of. Again, you can see your work go further. You can kind of see the change not happen over decades, but happen, quickly in some cases, over months or over years. You can kind of make a bigger impact here. And frankly, I mean, this is a great town to raise a family, great town to buy a house in. I'm not a big city guy, and while I grew up on a farm, while that might be appealing, obviously the services of living in a city and being part of a community are really great.
Sure. Okay. And so that element, and I know some of the things that you just mentioned were some of the reasons why. My first and foremost reason why I stayed was family. My wife and I, we decided this is where she wanted to be. This is where we had family ties, and this is where we were going to start creating some roots. And then career then followed that decision. And
how long have you been in Rockford?
I've been here my entire life. I was born here, and so I was born at Swedish American Hospital. So I was born here. Grew up in McChesney Park. So I went to Harlem, but we moved back into Rockford since Diane and I have been together since '92, and so I've been living in the city of Rockford since that time period, and intentionally, because of our positive experience with our kids at the Rockford Public School when they were in grade school, we chose to buy our third home in Rockford and not go to the outlying area. Though I did think at one time, or at least Diane thought, that I'd be bleeding black and orange because of my ties to Harlem. But because of our experience at Carlson Grade School with our kids, we made the choice to invest in the Rockford area, and so that's where we invested not only with our own personal life and home and that aspect of it, but then that's where we with KP and investing there as far as properties that we've bought here regarding KP. So
I'm glad you said the word investing, because you can invest in a lot of different ways. Obviously, when you say the word invest, you automatically assume financially, but it's not the case. I mean, people invest emotionally, people invest with their time, people invest most importantly with their time engagement. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have a problem in Rockford, a leadership problem in Rockford, in terms of actual engagement and investment by our residents. And people that move here, they seem to come here, as a stop for their career, or maybe again, they graduate high school and then they want to get out. But for a thriving community to really to get to where we want to go, where our potential could lead us, we need more people to say, hey, I'm here, I'm proud, and I'm invested. I'm invested. And that doesn't mean, you're signing your life away, I'm going to live here for the rest of my life or anything like that, but we have real problems that we have to dig into, and that requires people's attention, people to gather around the table and talk in earnest about what we can do.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was another element that, when I think back on it, wanted to make a difference, right? And my thing was mental health counseling, mental illness, and that element of it. But it was wanting to make a difference, and hearing stories about how other communities turned around. I remember very clearly in the mid 2000s going, I guess we don't have to go anywhere but right here to. There's enough opportunity here for a resurrection story here. I don't have to go and transplant myself to another community to be a part of a solution there. What can we do to be a solution here? So I know that was a conscious part of our of choice that Diane and I were making at that time, and the direction that we were going to go with, specifically with KP, let alone the other companies. So
yeah, and I'll plug you because I know you won't, but KP has been a foundational partner for mental health I know you've been doing it for decades, and your work in the community has been fantastic. So I want to thank you for that, being a leader in that way.
Well, thank you. Well, you mentioned a leader, so let's kind of jump into this. So this will be one of those things where it may get uncomfortable. Okay,
bring it on.
So we'll see. And over the time, and I know you've been following the podcast, you've heard me talk about the idea of dualistic thinking, this us versus them. And I think a few months ago I was, utilized the idea, because it was football season, are you a Bears fan, are you a Packers fan? And the essence was, are you a specific team fan, meaning you want your team to win at all costs, which means that the other person's team has to lose, or are you a football fan? And the idea of dualistic thinking is us versus them. Non-dualistic thinking is the idea of being a football fan and watching and appreciating a good game versus who's the outcome with. And as we've talked numerous times, that isn't to take away that you're not going to do everything in your ability to, when we're talking about a game, a finite game like a football, that we're going to do everything we possibly can to win, because there's something about that as well, to being able to give 100% in just the journey of giving 100% and putting forth that effort is maybe more so than the outcome. But it seems right now at the national level for sure, the state level as well, and probably here at the local level, this dualistic us versus them, and what I've been, I haven't felt at a national level anyone having the courage to step up and lead, meaning lead from a standpoint of what's better for the overall good versus what's better for my particular party or agenda or whatever. And it seems, and of course we're going into the election year, presidential election year, let alone the other Senate, Congress, now at the county level as well, this idea that a strategy to try to win is try to make the other person look like a loser. So tell us a little bit about how you have talked about what you've done as a leader with Midwest Packaging, and what you just got done talking about as a leader getting involved with everything from the chamber to Next Rockford to Family Peace Center to Rockford Promise. How do you want to try to lead, not just win, but lead at the county level?
Well, I want to start this out by, I'm going to throw something at you real quick. Yeah. So when I say, we'll just do a little thought experiment, Winnebago, or the phrase Winnebago County Board, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
I know for me, that for me was when I went through the process of getting KP rezoned, to go from a residential, the building was a residential building, and I was asking the county board to turn that into, rezone it to commercial office building so that we could then grow from that end of it. That's my direct, when I think of the county board, is at that point the board was forward thinking about what they wanted to do with that area of the county, and because it was all essentially residential in that area, and they saw what they wanted, where they wanted to grow, and from that element. So for me, that's what my personal experience, that's what I think of. So,
but I mean, in the news right now, or what the current state of the county board is, one word you think would kind of capture your feelings on that?
I would say probably impotent.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, dysfunctional. I mean, there's a, and that is not unusual from in my campaign. And I'm a candidate for Winnebago County Board first and foremost. I should clear that up because I believe in servant leadership, and I believe strongly that business leaders have a responsibility to not only be business leaders but to be community leaders. And so part of that process, when I'm talking about engaging and investing in this community, is frankly we need more people with business sense and more people who share a holistic view of our community to be public servants. And I didn't make that choice lightly. It's an extremely time-consuming and difficult process to get elected, and then obviously serve on a board that is facing kind of the problems that it is. But I ask you that because there has to be a mutual trust between the board and its constituents and the community at large, because the problems that we're facing are not small. The problems we're facing are real. We have $325 million in infrastructure deferments that are going on that continue to pile up $10 million per annual year. We have no mental health services, and it is getting on the referendum. There's sales generating ways of doing that, but the amount of decisions that are being made at the board level, the fiscal and also collaborative kind of nature of leadership, I think is not evident at this time. And for us to be able to tackle these problems, I felt that my skill set was unique to be able to do some of these things, to dig in and really kind of be able to make an impact that's not happening right now. The current county board is aware of these problems. I'm not saying that they don't understand them, but they're failing to act on what's happening. They're failing to make a real difference, and they're choosing to resort to these petty politics, these name callings, these defining the power of the chairman, and these kind of things are very juvenile as it relates to what our overall mission of good governance is. And so absolutely, I think that we have issues that are systematic and institutionalized that need to be resolved for us to move forward as a community.
So how, obviously, part of leadership is casting a vision, inviting people into not only casting that vision, saying it and setting it in a way that people can become part of that story, and as they're invited to participate in whatever way that is. How do you envision that happening especially in a situation that the general public may not even fully grasp. What is the county board? What is it responsible for doing? What does it have the ability to do? So there's that, and maybe even some individuals that are on the board may themselves how to work together, how to be leaders working together. So what are some of your thoughts from that element to if you get elected, right? Mm-hmm. In what ways, based upon some of the things that you've been involved with before, what are some things that you would do to lead from that element of not only casting a vision? Obviously, your role would you'd be one of many on that board, but what is your thoughts on that?
Well, you're right. It's a 20-person board, and so I'm not running to run the county or anything like that, and have no illusions of doing so. But as you mentioned, it's a collaborative effort. It's teamwork, and currently the county board is not working. It's extremely siloed, and there's tribes that pop up, little coalitions that have 4 or 5 members that start going in one direction, and another silo goes in another direction, and oftentimes they bump into each other, and that's where you see the conflicts. Mm-hmm. But the first thing that I would do, if elected, is establish some kind of shared vision and values. Mm-hmm. I think that the discourse that's been going around the county board for years has been uncivil and dysfunctional, mm-hmm. and that's a product of a lack of trust and respect among its members, frankly, mm-hmm. among all parties involved. Not just the county board, obviously the chairman, the staff that works there, the administrator, all the different committees, and not many people know this, but the county employs thousands of workers that are impacted by these squabblings at the highest level. They're working overtime all the time. They're short-staffed in a lot of cases. There's some extremely disturbing findings coming out of our county jail, where actually it's gotten so bad that the U.S. Marshals are threatening to pull their prisoners that they have housed there, and that would be a loss of $1.8 million in revenue annually. And it's just losses that we can't afford. Mm-hmm. We can't afford to stand by and let these kind of things happen. And it's ultimately driven by leadership, as you mentioned. And so kind of coming together and having a shared value and then having a plan for how we're going to do this and making the hard decisions. And it's not going to be all sunshine and roses. I'm not going to disillusion myself or anyone else that this is going to be easy work. Mm-hmm. It's going to be difficult work. Right. And that's unfortunately the situation we're in. But just having the ability to have a collaborative approach on this and also leverage our partnerships with our municipalities, and not only our municipalities, but with our state and federal governments, to be able to go to the table and say, hey, we have a capital plan now. What can you commit to this? Well, okay, this falls under our umbrella of capital improvement. We can partner with you. No one's doing that now. Yeah. That's the reality. Yeah. No one's coming to the state with a unified plan and a unified budget that we're able to execute some of these things that we need to do. Gotcha.
Well, I definitely think one of the advantages, if all works out, right, and the election goes in a positive direction, and you're elected to the county board, I think one of the benefits of being a new person on the board is then you can ask those questions that maybe if people have been on there for a while don't ask, mm-hmm. because they supposedly know, right, or this is how it's always been. Right. I think of recently I was in this particular organization, the church I was attending, had a leadership board and be similar elders with different names, but essentially the same thing. Well, the first year that I was on there, I had a ton of questions. They were legitimate questions. It wasn't manipulation. I just didn't have the answer, and so I had questions. And so there was a handful of us that were new to the board. We had attended the church for the last 20 plus years, but these were things that we just didn't know. We had questions but no answers, and that led then to some of the things that you were talking about creating a shared vision, creating that shared vision out of some shared values, and that we could then present and invite other individuals from the congregation to be part of. Mm-hmm. And that was it was not an easy exercise to do, and sometimes with those obvious questions or tough questions, came a lot of work to search what does this really mean, and long dialogues and going back and forth about discussions, and in really trying to step into that space of being aware of the whole picture and not just about not pleasing people, or in this particular case, concerned about displeasing certain individuals, and that I know that was not always easy to do, but inviting for ourselves, recognizing that we were serving something bigger than ourselves, and that's where some of those questions were coming from, and so it was an interesting time period to be involved with that element, which has been different, which was different than other things that I've been involved with throughout my career.
Did you get some of the results that you were hoping to get?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's the overall the direction that it's moving in now is even though I'm not on the board currently, is moving much more in a hopeful, beneficial time period for the community, as well as the existing community around the church, but also the community within it, and it's a difficult time right now because there's so many other options regarding worship in church. You don't have to attend a physical building, and I think I was just listening to someone the other day. The average person who identifies as being a Christian and attending a church attends 1 out of 4, or 1 out of 4 to 1 out of 6 Sundays. Physically attends the building 1 out of 4 to 1 out of 6 Sundays a month. That's not very often,
right?
Compared to at least what I grew up with.
Well, and again, to take this back to the county government, our county government is different than it was 10 years ago, than it was 4 years ago, than it definitely was 20 years ago. And so as our community needs shift and they change, you're absolutely right. I think a fresh perspective is needed. Turnover is needed. Because with a fresh perspective and a fresh vision, you bring in the questions of the community, the concerns of the community, because you are the community, to a certain aspect, and that's democracy, and that's beautiful. And I think the more turnover you can get, positive turnover, where there's not, I'm not saying, out with everyone.
Sure.
Don't get me wrong here.
Sure.
I'm not advocating that, but the point is that to get some fresh vision and get some fresh voice and some outside perspective, because there are insulative kind of thinking that in a group think kind of thing where we know it all and we have this ego about it, and we no longer need to explore this option or do this option because this is what we're used to and this is what works. Again, this is the way we've always done it. That kind of thinking can be extremely destructive when you're talking about government, because there always needs to be collaboration, there always needs to be continued partnerships, and these things are always changing. There's a ever-shifting dynamic to our community's needs and the available opportunities for solutions.
Well, and I think that change, and when the change comes with the right individuals who are instituting that change, it doesn't have to always come from a doom and gloom and this fear and catastrophe perspective. Does there need to be a sense of urgency that if we don't do something, then we're going to continue getting what we've always been getting? That's true. Could it get worse? Possibly. That's true too. But it needs to be kind of like what we talked earlier about with the Family Peace Center. Clearly looking at where the problem is and how much violence and crime comes out of the space of domestic violence and the ripple effect of domestic violence, then you start building a strategy on how to impact that, not just in one area, but along the continuum of services. It has to be more, if we're talking about domestic violence, it has to be more than just arresting the perpetrator and containing the perpetrator, because that just means bigger jails and more jails, but that isn't going to necessarily help the children, or help the wife or girlfriend or mom from going back to the familiar or the shame that she can't necessarily have a better life. And so I think being able to step in and ask those questions and look at strategic ways of how can we make an impact, how can we do some things different, and then how do we do it with inviting more people to help out.
Yeah, and I think if we take a step back and we look at our community from a bird's eye view, what are some of the biggest issues that we're facing as a community and how we're addressing them? Public safety obviously is at the forefront of everyone's mind, and oftentimes the justice system, and how it flows with justice or with public safety or with the crime deterrence or stopping crime or preventing crime. These things all have a part to play in our ethos of our community. I think education has a lot to do with that. Education is a huge variable to crime. I mean, you look at these statistics and there's a strong correlation between an largely uneducated population, its violent crime rate, and the other way too. So that's why I believe so strongly in Rockford Promise and sending more and more of our RPS 205 seniors on to higher education to develop these pathways, to develop into this career, to feed into our economic opportunities here in our community and keep our businesses vibrant, keep our prosperity keeping forward. And that ties into the work with the chamber, that ties into work with my own business, providing opportunities for economic development here and redevelopment and the infrastructure that goes along with it. And the county is a crucial partner in all those things, probably the overarching partner when you're talking about partnerships with the city of Rockford and other municipalities here. So there's a roadmap that can be laid out here to take us from, and I think it Transform Rockford, the one that's been touting that top 25 community by 2025. Well, 2025 is 5 years away.
It's not very long.
It's not very long. I think they unveiled it a few years ago. And time's ticking. And what we need is a roadmap and a plan on what we're going to do to check some of these boxes. In full transparency, where we struggle and where we're not doing well. And then how can we address these problems in a real way to be able to improve them and see real change. Yeah. And you had mentioned when you were talking earlier about the resistance to change, and I like to approach it like, what are we afraid of? What do we think can go wrong? Really deconstruct the impetus behind the being an obstacle to change.
Sure.
What are your core motivations behind? Is it fear-based? Is it anxiety-based? Is it fear of the unknown? Because if you can really deconstruct that and kind of give a better idea about where we're going, people feel better about it.
Right.
People feel like they're part of the process, they're engaged. And when we start to see the accomplishments, and we are, I mean, Rockford and the county are seeing some positive growth. There's great momentum here. We can celebrate that as a community, and we can say, yes, we did that, and now we're going to do the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. Yeah. And that's how all of a sudden we sit here in 2025 and we're like, wow, look at all we've done.
Right. Well, I think it's multidimensional, right? So it's more than one thing at a time. And yes, there has to be some critical things put in place in a certain level of priority in a certain order, but because it's a slow rollout, it's one, safety, right? You have to feel safe, and all the things that go into having a nonviolent community and a safe community then also deter individuals from coming in and making it the opposite of that, right? And so, and at the same time, while that's going on, there has to be other things that are causing people to be attracted. What are those things? Is it the arts? Is it sports? Is it, because we can have economic, opportunities. And we build on safety and economics, but then what are the reasons why people would want to spend the money that they make here and it's safe? So there's multiple components. I mean, right now, I don't recall as I've been cognizant of it, I don't recall that the first, we're now first 3 months of the year without a homicide. For being touted as one of the most violent cities in the United States, that is a huge benchmark to get through the first quarter of 2020 without a homicide. Based upon compared years in the past, that's a big deal. And there's a lot of things that are going in and getting put in place that have been rolling out for an extended period of time, specifically with the new police chief and the mayor, who's not new anymore, but that they've been doing, and a handful of different projects that they've been doing as well at the county level. But also then being attracted to different entertainment aspects of how are we going to choose to invest our money from leisure back into the community. And so I think there's a handful of things going on right now, and I'm excited about the possibilities. I'm excited about some young leaders that are involved. I like the idea that when you said that I could still be on the next Rockford because I still meet the criteria for that. So I was like, oh, I guess I could. Yeah. So that was interesting, having been born after 65. So that was good. Barely, but I'm there. But I do think there's a lot of collaboration that's actually happening now that maybe a few decades ago was talked about, but not actually happened.
Well, I think when you look at where we've been and where we're going, because it is as important it is to have a focus on the future, it also is important to look back at our past and understand where we came from and why some of our problems have been around. But and you look back at our airport, I mean, it's absolutely booming. We're one of the fastest growing airports in the world. A recent study in terms of cargo coming through Rockford, I mean, millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of cargo coming through Rockford with partnerships with Amazon and things like that. We're a hub for the aerospace industry with many, many facilities employing hundreds, if not thousands of people in the aerospace industry. And then you mentioned the entertainment value. I mean, we have this beautiful historic Coronado Theater downtown, the downtown revitalization going on. Japanese Anderson Gardens is just a treasure. I mean, there are a lot of really amazing gems here in our community here in Winnebago County that there are a lot of things to be proud of. There are a lot of things, and you mentioned the crime statistics. Their crime has been going down in Rockford over the past couple of years at a pretty substantial rate, and so that kind of gives you some credence to the fact that what we're doing, we're on the right track. Right. The community policing, the task force has been set up, the different initiatives that have been happening have been successful, and our overall positive momentum. And when I mention overall momentum of the community, I'm glad that we're getting into specifics now on the achievements that we're seeing, and that it is possible to hope again. It is possible to see a brighter future here in Rockford, and to be a part of that is humbling. Yeah. It really is.
Well, Rob, I know you have a busy next few weeks are really busy for you, not just with life. You're engaged to be married in May. You have a new puppy who looks like he's getting bigger and bigger every time I turn around and see a picture. But then from a political standpoint, as well as all the different things that you're involved with. So I appreciate you taking out some time and being with us today, and for our listeners to be able to maybe hear as you maybe broke down a little bit more about what things that you would like to do for the Winnebago County and the Rockford area. And if there's anything that you wanted to leave for the listeners, what would you want to leave the listeners with?
Well, I mean, just a completely self-interest plug. The elections on March 17th, I have a primary, and then, of course, the general elections in November. Okay. So I'll be campaigning for the next 6 months or so. We've already knocked on over 1,000 doors. We've connected with every voter in the district, either by mail, text, or or just going door to door and calling them. And so I'll continue to do that. So any interest in my campaign, our website is voteyoung17.com.
Okay.
Also, if anyone was interested in the Family Peace Center and what we talked about today, there are a couple ways you can give back without being a huge sponsor or anything like that. I'd mentioned that I'm a founding member of 100 Men Who Give a Damn, and our next event is on April 6th at Alley Oop Sports Bar downtown.
Okay.
We're going to be watching the national championship game, having a good time for a great cause, and so I'd encourage people to Google 100 Men Who Give a Damn and register for that event. And that's for men, and then there's also an 815 Women with a Mission. And so if you're a woman and you want to get involved in that way, please join that group. We have events all through the year. So
nice.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, thank you very much for being with us, and good luck in the next couple weeks and in everything that you're involved with. But I know that for you, regardless of how things roll out with the election, you're invested in the county, invested in the city of Rockford, and you'll continue doing good things. So I appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you for being with us today. As we've talked about, obviously a serious topic of domestic violence, but not only about the impact of domestic violence, but of how do we make change in the community? How do we become part of a solution? And as Rob mentioned, there's a handful of different ways, and in Rob's case, he took some of his gifts and talents and experiences and got involved the way that he can by being a leader within the community. Look forward to being with you again next week. We'll see you then.